with a first speaker. She is Eunice Adwa Sarpong from University of Paraku, and she will speak about rural land tenure, transition, and food security, and a very interesting ethnography study on agro-pastoral communities in northern Benin. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I think my topic has been rightly introduced by our chair. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that my research is sponsored I'm part of a research group called DECLARI, Decision Support for Strengthening Land Resilience, and it's been sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Research, Technology and Space. I also want to acknowledge the immense support and the general support of the ANH Academy for my participation in this year's conference. Thank you very much. All right, so quickly, this will be our agenda for today. As a way of introduction, let me say that land is more than just a physical resource. It embodies history, identity, belonging, and supports livelihoods of many rural communities. In northern Benin, communities rely on customary tenure systems. Customary tenure system signifies that the land was collectively or has been collectively owned and passed down by descent. Presently, state-led rural land reform in Benin aims to shift land reform from communal systems or from communal holdings to individual titles, and this will be achieved through land registration programs. I'm sure most of you are aware that in Africa, we have so many land reforms ongoing. Northern Benin is not of exception. So what's the rationale behind land reforms in Africa or in the context of Benin? The rationale is that formalizing customary tenure will improve tenure security and then increase agricultural productivity and food security. We argue that this is a linear way of framing it, or this is a linear way of thinking about tenure security, agricultural productivity, and food security. And I'm sure many of you have seen it in the discussions we've been having so far. The relationships are more complex than these linear framings. So what do we aim to understand from this our research? We aim to look at the relationship between land tenure, agriculture, and food security. And we describe the processes as more complex, which I'll be showing empirical evidence. Briefly on context, because of our time. So I'm working with agro-pastoral communities in northern Benin, Fulanis in particular. Let me quickly say that Fulanis are not homogeneous, they are diverse, but then they share a history of nomadism or semi-nomadic pastoralism. This code should open us to our empirical findings. It says land registration is not new to us Fulanis. We knew this day would come. That's why whenever we farmed on land, we planted trees. It is our way of marking land and asserting our ownership. This comment from the focus group discussion that we had in 2023 opens up to think about how rural actors or emic perspective of ownership, because from the state's logic, ownership means that there are formal or legal titles, but from the locals, prior to even the introduction of these frameworks or prior to the introduction of land titles, they had already asserted their land claims using symbolic or ecological markers as trees. So that means that we see the logic of ownership from emics or from locals are quite different from how the state interprets ownership. This is just a quick view of the community, one of the main community that I'm working, Bukusera. Let me quickly say that when you look at the land cover, you will see many greens and there are grays. The many greens are often plantations, and which will be seen in our the empirical findings. Plantations mostly of cashews, tech, marina, and mangoes. The gray areas are settled areas and farmlands. All right, so how did we do this, or how do we understand? Because a land cover does not tell us the story of how the land is used. So we did a land tenure mapping. The land tenure mapping gives us access to understand who owns what, who has access to what, who is growing what. And that's how come we did the tenure mapping. Because of our time, I'll go on. Probably we can have later discussions during the question time. So this was, so as I mentioned, my approach is ethnography. So we did a simple mapping to using ordinary markers. So we had the map of the village, and we allow locals to map their tenure, their ownership. When you look there, it's easier for you to see. So the legend shows there is community land, for instance, forest, gardening, school land. So all these forests belongs to the community, but we have family lands, and I will explain the family system. So if you look at the map carefully, you will see we have keyed it. So we have like 10, we have like 12. So one big family, and a family comprises of so many household heads. So for instance, when we key 12.1, it can signify 12 as a large family. Let me assume the family is called Dauda. So this Dauda, as we see it, they are the owners of the 12, or let me say 25 hectares of land. But don't forget that people are not individuals, they are collective. So Dauda definitely has sons. So he has 6 sons and he has 25 hectares of land. How then do they use the land? Let's focus on Ali, one of Dauda's sons. So what Ali does is that his father has assigned 7 hectares of land to him. Of course, they have social relations in the communal setting. A son can still get married, but still lives in the father's hamlet. So now let's have a quick look at the land use dynamics or the land use patterns. All right. So for Dauda, most of the lands, he already took it from his father. So most of the lands are cashew plantations, as you can see. Then, because it's an agro-pastoral area, there's also cattle, so he has to plant forage. Forage production is increasing because now there are no free range, so people need to plant food for the cattle. So we can see that there's 4 hectares assigned to cashew plantation. There's a folder. There is 1 hectare assigned to food crops, and also half a hectare for women's land access. Let me note that here we are looking at complementary roles. We are not discussing women as distinct because women are part of the households. Then he assigns half a hectare for fallow. So if you look at our previous, we said 1 hectare for or 1 and plus for the food crops, but it's more complex than that. So this is an agricultural calendar of the community. On the same piece of land, they intercrop. So on the same piece of land, they'll be having maize, they'll be having sorghum. Rivers are planted on rice on river banks, but they intercrop on the same piece of land for their food. And you understand that some of these crops demand high soil nutrient. For instance, yams. Yams cannot be planted on degraded lands. So briefly, what does this scenario tell us? So what we see is that the formal, when I say formal, because land reform in practice is slow in the local context, because most of them are now parceling the land, they are registering the land, but there are local adaptive measures or local responses. Prior to the reform, the locals have parceled the land. So what we see is that the land rights, because those lands that we saw, is going to get a legal backing to the people owning it. So it restricts flexible land arrangement, because if you have 5 hectares of cashew, that means you cannot plant food crops, which the locals depend on it. Somebody will argue that, of course, cashew contributes to household income. Yes, but don't also forget that cashew depends on climatic conditions. So, for instance, this year, we didn't have so much yields in my community, and not only my community. And the price of cashews is determined also by the government. So we have, for instance, a kilo for 350 CFA francs. That is about $62. So that has not become, so let me say that households' income are still vulnerable to ecological factors. Then we could clearly see the land fragmentation over there. So we could clearly see the land fragmentation. So our take-home message that we are understanding today, that when it comes to drawing a linear connection between rural land tenure, when it comes to drawing a linear connection between agricultural productivity, of course, there is increase in productivity, but that does not result in increase in food production, because the locals are going more into cash crop. They are contributing to cash crop production, which mostly they don't consume it. So mostly it's for exportation. So we really need to have a focus and look at how these tenure systems are slow. They are slow, but once it's been embedded, or once it comes into the system, is different to change, because these are social factors we are looking at. So our take-home message is that when we look at tenure systems, relation to agricultural productivity, it's more complex than the linear connections that we often draw. And lastly, we want to encourage that agriculture or farming production should be more connected to the local needs, be connected to their consumption patterns, and we should reduce more of the externalities. Thank you very much for listening. Okay.
Thank you very much, Eunice. And I can very well understand the dynamics of formalizing land tenure requires a lot of understanding of the community where you are implementing that. Thank you very much. It was very interesting and to know similar things happens back in Asia as well. Our next speaker, I'll call upon our next speaker. He is Muhammad Sadat Anwar, IFPRI, and the title of his research and work is Trends in Diet Composition and Nutrient Adequacy in Rural Bangladesh. Please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the ANH conference committee for having me here and giving me a chance to present my paper. So I'd like to acknowledge our funder for this research, CGIR program for Scaling for Impact program. And also, I'd like to thank my co-authors, Dr. Ben Melton, MD Masum Ali, Razin Iqbal Kobir, and Mir Rayhan Islam for collaborating in this study. So from my topic of the study, you'd see that this research is based in Bangladesh. So you may ask, why Bangladesh? Because if I may give you a brief background on Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a small country in South Asia with a large population, which has borders mostly with India and a part with Myanmar. So how large you would think the population size is? It's 170 million, and it's about 6.5 times smaller than Tanzania. So you would understand that it's a small country with a large population density. So, and if you can look back at history, you'd see that during the past century, two of the deadliest famines in history has the Greater Bengal region. One in 1943 during the Second World War, and another one is 1974, just after the country became independent. So, and also, if you can look at the prior research, you'd see that famous economists like Amartya Sen has actually attributed these famines towards food accessibility issues rather than food affordability or availability issues, because during those crisis periods there was enough food for everyone, but due to supply chain disruptions, due to war or any natural disasters, people could not get enough food and there were like millions of deaths. So the governments of Bangladesh has always emphasized on this, that they wanted to ensure food security for Bangladeshi population, and they wanted to actually, in Bangladesh, food population is synonymous to rice. Food security is synonymous to rice security. So if I may dive deep into my research, so we have seen that during the last 25 years, shown remarkable progress in terms of economic growth, and this is also accompanied by food system transformation. So in our study, we analyzed trends of rural diet composition using tracking changes in food budget shares. Also, we assessed trends in food consumption inequality, and also estimated changes in contributions of different food groups to nutritional requirements. So what method we used? So for this research, we used IFPRI's nationally representative panel data, which is called the BIHS, Bangladesh Integrated Household Survey. In this study, we actually tracked the same households over 3 periods, one in 2011, one in 2015, and the last one was in 2019. For every round, the total sample size was more than 5,400 households. So it is a nationally representative panel rural survey of Bangladesh, which actually incorporated all the 7 divisional administrative divisions. Also for this study, we used government data from the Department of Agriculture and Marketing to assess the change, track the changes in food prices. And also we use CPI data from the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, so that nominal prices are transformed into real prices. So for this study, we use descriptive associations between changes in diet, price changes, implications for nutrition, and implications for equality. So what do we mean by transforming diets? So it refers to shifting food consumption patterns toward more healthier, more diverse, and more sustainable diet that promote human health and environmental well-being, as you all know. It involves reducing reliance on ultra-processed foods and increasing intake of nutrient-rich, minimally such as fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, often in response to changes in agriculture policy and consumer behavior. So this transformation of diets can reflect changes in supply, changes in demand, and changes in relative food prices. So first of all, we look at the food budget share, what has changed in this arena. So we can see two more major changes that has occurred. That one is Bangladesh's overly reliance on staple or rice consumption has been on the decrease. So we see that about 12% decrease in contribution of food budget expenditure in staples, which is a good thing that people, if you have more income to shift towards nutrition item, that is good. But the bad thing is we have also observed that food away from home is on the increase, that about 6% of the of this share has gone up between 2012 and 2019. And also we can you can see from the pie charts that vegetables and fruits, meats and eggs and dairy and aquatic food has also on the rise, which is a good thing. So if we then look at the quantitative section, we used like 24-hour recall period for that, and we see that rice has decreased, rice consumption. Then freshwater fish consumption has decreased, which is not a very good thing. Then dairy consumption has increased, fruits consumption has increased quite a lot, and also deep fried and ultra processed food and sugary products and beverages has increased, which is bad for health. So for these graphs, actually you have to be aware of the geography of Bangladesh. So I can see that first three, Borishal, Khulna and Chittagong is on the southern side and is on the seashore, and Dhaka is the capital, and Sylhet, Rajshahi and Rangpur is on the northern side. So if we look at the changes in nutrient adequacy, we would see that for this estimation, we use the EAR or estimated average requirement. So we see that in overall, there has not been much change, like from 71% to 72%, so just 1% increase in overall. But if we see deep into this graph, we see that for inadequacy has increased for energy, protein, thiamine, vitamin, calcium and zinc, and adequacy has increased for fat, vitamin C, riboflavin and iron. So declining inequality in food expenditure, which is a good thing. For this for this analysis, we used 5 quintiles. So we see that for most of the items, the Gini coefficient value has actually decreased. So we can see that the inequality in food expenditure has been on the decrease. So for this part, we use the equity plot of nutrient adequacy. We see that biggest increase in nutrient intake and reduction in inequality are for fats, fairly stable patterns for inequality in nutrient adequacy over time, and some improvement in vitamin A and C. If we look at the real long-term changes in price, we see that long-term decline in the price of rice and cereals, fluctuating potato prices, and peak of wheat prices due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And if we see in the real price of meat and eggs and milk, we see that 50% decrease in the price of chicken, which actually contributed to the increase of consumption of meat and chicken and eggs. And also there is a long-term decline in the price of milk, which is also linked with the increased consumption of milk, and long-term increase in price of other meat, which is actually beef. So there has been a decrease in intake, which is actually demand. We know these from the economics rule of demand and supply. So decline in the price of aquaculture, which is quite surprising, but it may be driven by the price of hilsa, and only slight price increase following the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So vegetable price has shown seasonal variability, and food prices trended down, and also this has actually led to increased consumption. So what are the implication and conclusion for this study? So we see that nutrient inadequacy continues to affect rural Bangladesh, because the change over the 8 years is only 1%. Are we happy with this one? No, we need more effort in this arena, right? So that we can ensure more nutrient adequacy for the rural population in Bangladesh. Suggests an emerging triple burden of malnutrition, because food away from home is on the rise. So undernutrition, micronutrient deficiency, and increasing overweight, obesity is observed in Bangladesh. Real rural incomes rose between 2012 to 2019, accompanied by a slight decline in income equality, creating more room for dietary changes, which is true. This period saw a long-term decline in real prices of most foods, improving affordability and access. As a result, a nutrition transition occurred, and greater diet diversity and reduced dependence on staple foods like rice has occurred. Rice intake declines significantly, potentially reducing intakes in micronutrients historically derived from rice. And also, consumption of low nutrient non-staples like sugary foods and farm chicken has increased, and more nutritious staples like fruits, pulses, dairy, eggs, poultry has increased. Nutrition gains were offset by reduced intake of captured fish and rice. Regional disparities has also been observed. Despite changes in food choices, there was limited improvement in overall nutrient intake and inequality except for fat, which increased and became more equitable and equitably distributed. So, and after 2022, sharp increase in food prices likely led to worsening diet quality, which is actually a concerning fact, underlining the need for stronger social safety nets to protect the most vulnerable households in rural Bangladesh. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sadat. And if we have to move and transform towards a healthier diet, I guess we just don't have to look at the food cycle chain only, because we do see that things were better, but in spite of that, we were having unhealthier diet. Maybe social behavior change, communication needs to push in. Okay, so we now move to a third speaker, Lucia Segovia de la Rivera. I hope I've pronounced your name. I've practiced enough. She's from the Faculty of Epidemiology and Population Health, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, UK, and her talk will be on the importance of using spatial resolved maize selenium composition in estimating apparent selenium intakes and its inadequacy in Malawi. Please.
Oh, yeah. Hi, thank you very much all for coming today. And thank you for at the organization for a fantastic ANH Academy. I'm enjoying very much the warm weather and the warmer people here in Tanzania. But let me now turn to my research, which is in another very warm people country, Malawi. So I don't think I need to tell anyone in this forum how important are micronutrient deficiencies, and they are still widespread globally, and unfortunately, especially in low and middle income countries. So for example, in Malawi, the selenium deficiency is affecting more than 60% of women between 15 and 49 years old. And this deficiency is mainly caused by inadequate intake of selenium. So they don't eat enough selenium in their diet. So just a quick reminder for those that are not really into estimating nutrient intake. So these estimations are normally done using two types of data set. So one is food consumed, so how much maize you consumed or how much rice have you consumed, and then the nutrient content of those foods. So how much selenium is in that maize, how much selenium is in that rice, and then you can estimate the whole selenium in the diet, and then you can compare with your so you can imagine that on a two-side equation, one side of the equation gonna be very important to estimate the total nutrient intake. So variation in the composition of selenium when you calculate intakes is going to be very important, especially in contexts like Malawi, where you can see spatial variation of the selenium concentration in maize. What does mean? It means that if you look at the southern area of Malawi, in a dark green shade, you can see higher concentration in selenium in maize. And if you look at the northern area of Malawi, you can see lighter green, that it means that have lower selenium concentration. So then you can imagine with 80% population living in rural environment and with very short food supply chains, you can imagine that where you live is going to influence the selenium that you are getting through your diet. And therefore, that selenium that you're getting through your diet is going to impact your selenium status. And this is not new. The links between soil, nutrition, crops, and status of population is being studied before. So here, just roughly, you can see two sets of village, one living in one type of soil and the other group of village living in a different type of soil. And then you can see that where people have higher dietary selenium intake, they have higher blood plasma selenium intake, and the opposite is true. So why then we focus on maize? Well, as you can see, maize is highly consumed in Eastern and Southern Africa, and I don't think anyone here, I mean, most of you know, but even Malawi is high, even compared with the rest of the countries in the region. So it's also one of the main source of selenium in Malawian diet. So we can think how important is that for or estimate. So basically, our idea is that from this high resolution data set of maize selenium concentration, can we use that to estimate our nutrient intake? And would that make a difference of what is normally used, like food composition data? So that is the topic of my research. So to do that, what we use for the composition, to estimate the consumption, we use the Malawi household survey. It's a 7-day recall at household level, and it has a GPS coordinate for every cluster. And then for the composition, we use 3 scenarios. One baseline scenario, so we use what everyone uses normally, so food composition data from published food composition databases. So we use Malawi, but unfortunately, it has a lot of missing values for selenium, so we have to use the Kenya food composition table to complete that data. Then for the national maize scenario, we take all the maize and maize products that they were reported in the household survey, and then we change the value to one single value from that highly spatial resolute data set to one single value. And then we have a location-based scenario. So what we did is that we take the highly resolution data set, we took the GPS coordinate of every cluster, and we calculate the maize selenium concentration for every cluster. So it's different for every cluster. And then we calculate the the selenium intakes. So first one is the baseline scenario. So as I mentioned, most of the data was coming from Kenya. So you can see a very green map. So it means that the apparent selenium intake was mostly above the average requirement. Then when we look at the national data, so it's one data single point, but data actually from Malawi, then we can see almost the opposite picture, right? So most of the estimate were below the average requirement. And then when we use our location-based data set, we can see a more nuanced picture. So we can see areas in the south of Malawi where the maize selenium concentration was high, that is above the requirements, and then other areas more in the north that are still like below the requirement. So then what does mean for the risk of apparent inadequacy? So as you can see again, on the north, the baseline is in yellow, in dark green is the national, and then the location specific is the light green. So in the northern, we can see again, like if you estimate by baseline scenario, you will be likely underestimating the risk of selenium apparent intake. And then if you use local data, you probably are estimating correctly. And then it gets interesting in the central region where you have Salima. If you use different scenario, different data, you have a complete different risk of apparent inadequacy. Same goes for the south. We'll have areas where it will be even higher than when we were using the data from Kenya. The same goes for Chihuahua. So, so what are the summary or the take-home, right? So then what we see is that when we use location-based maize selenium concentration, we have like more nuanced estimate, and they are very important, especially at the national level. We also compare or estimate with the risk of deficiency based on plasma selenium concentration, and we're more aligned with the estimate from the location-based estimate. And then we see like natural occurring selenium concentration in maize could improve the selenium status. And finally, we are all here for nutrition and agricultural links. So what is the relevance? Well, with these kind of data sets that are more disaggregated, we can plan some national agricultural and nutrition policies that are more meaningful. We will also identify populations that are at higher risk. So we can build policies that are more equitable and cost-effective. And finally, I would like to make a call that more effort is needed into provide local food composition data for our estimate. Just a final slide. I just want to say that although what I present here is based on selenium and in maize in Malawi, is not the only place where you see spatial variations. So you can see a spatial variation for zinc in maize, but also in Ethiopia, in teff, grain, and wheat. So this is not only for this context, but it's widely applicable. finally, thank you very much to the MAPS team, all my colleague, PhD supervisor, Edward. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lucia. And I think she has put up a proposal that we now don't need only national food data composition, but maybe if it's an agriculture country and we assume the same nutrient is in all the fruits and vegetables, now we are talking about location-wise, regional, district-wise food composition table if we want to really assess the dietary adequacy of our population. Okay, we now move on to our online speakers. I hope they are there. Okay, so our next speaker is Anne-Marie Meyer. She is going to talk about historical changes in the mineral content of fruit and vegetables in the UK from 1940 to 2019, a concern for human nutrition and agriculture. And she comes from Coventry University. Okay, we're ready, Anne.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, following on from the last speaker, I'm also going to talk about composition of foods. And this has been an interest of mine since about the mid-1990s. And I've been looking at the changes from 1940 to 2019, which is about 80 years. Next. So the overall question really is that given the enormous agriculture, food system and nutrition challenges, has the industrialization of agriculture reduced the nutritional quality of food? So I had a hunch that this probably would be the case. And next slide. I was able to make use of the fact that the British composition of food tables have been updated at various intervals. So they were first produced in 1936, which was really before industrialization kicked in, updated again in 1991, and then updated again in 2019. So this is, when I say updated, for the fruit and vegetables in particular. So the other additions were adding extra foods, etc. But the fruit and vegetables were only updated at these particular time points. And at each time point, the composition of foods represented sort of average types of food that people were eating. So they weren't conventional or organic, they were just typical of the time. Next. And yes, the data I've published twice, originally the first comparison I looked at, and then for the second comparison. So there are 2 papers written on this that you can refer to for more details. Next. So the methods, we were able to compare the mineral content of fruit and vegetables at these 3 time points. And the only minerals that we could include were the ones that appeared in each 3 composition of food table editions. And also the vegetables and fruits had to appear at all 3 time points. And for each time point, we could work out the ratio of new to old values. Their means were then calculated, adjusted to the dry weight, and then we could take the average percentage change for each mineral was then calculated. And then I made use of the National Diet and Nutrition Survey to have a look at what the effect of these reductions might be. And then I used a literature search for some possible causes. And then went to some farmers actually in Kenya to talk to them about how they would approach this problem. Next. So cutting straight to the results, this is the first time period between 1940 and 1991, representing a 50-year period. And I was rather alarmed to see all these reductions. So sodium gone down about 30%. The most was copper, but there was a general trend across all the minerals, with the exception of phosphorus. Next. And then in the next time period, it was a bit more nuanced. So this is the period 1991 to 2019. Sodium decreased again. There was a slight recovery for magnesium. Phosphorus now decreased. Iron decreased even more, and there was a slight recovery in copper. Next. So when we look at the overall period, this 80-year period, so the three that have reduced the most, sodium, iron and copper, and magnesium 10%, but still significant. Next. So between us, we put together a possible list of the reasons for these declines. And I'm just going to concentrate on a few of them today. Next. So looking at the changes in varieties or cultivars during this period. So what we're talking about here is when the yield increases, you get what's known as a genetic dilution effect of the minerals, as the yield increases. Next. So I've referred to some data by Don Davis here, who looked at similar comparisons in the United States. And he put together some literature showing, this is actually fruit, vegetables and also some grains, and found that nearly all the side-by-side studies that there were looking at low versus high yield crops showed that there was a lower nutrient content in the higher yielding varieties. Okay, next. And then another issue was about actual farming methods. And we're thinking about the early methods would have been a bit more like organic farming today. And the newer methods include a lot of conventional agriculture. Next. So yes, I did a look through a lot of literature, reviews comparing organic to conventional farming, and on the whole, they're not showing consistent results. But I think this is a complex issue, and there are a lot of confounding variables, and it's quite difficult to show a difference because of the enormous variability that there is. The later data, when we look at cohorts, it's a little bit different. And the cohorts, the long-term trials, do tend to show some differences. Next. So looking at the soil microbiology related to this shift to industrial agriculture, so we know that the availability of minerals in the soil is very much linked to soil microbiology, and particularly the mycorrhizal fungi, which form symbiotic relationship with plant roots. Next. So this is a picture of a plant root, and you can see the hyphae of the fungi go straight into the plant cells, making the minerals more available. Next. Not a lot of data on this, but what we can see is that this fungal relationship is impaired by the use of fertilizers. Soil disturbance also disturbs the mycorrhiza. And in the very few inoculation studies there are, we can't really look at the live situation in the soil, but the inoculation studies, several of these show that there are higher mineral content where there's the mycorrhizal infection. So even though the agroecology studies I mentioned earlier aren't showing a lot and not consistently, most of the trials where we actually look at the soil and the soil life do show a difference. Next. The other issue that's come up is about changing climate. Next. And okay, so this isn't fruit and vegetables, this is rice. And what we're doing here is showing an artificial increase in the carbon dioxide, atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is accompanied by a reduction in the nutrient content. This is a whole load of different rice varieties. So looking at the iron content and the zinc content, as you increase the carbon dioxide, so the nutrients decrease. And we can call this a carbon dioxide induced dilution effect. So we've got the dilution effect from genetics, we've got the dilution effect from the atmospheric carbon dioxide, and there's the other dilution effect from adding fertilizers, which I didn't manage to find data on that. Okay, next. So at least three possible reasons. Changes in variety, possibly the agroecological versus conventional, and the soil microbiology and change in climate. Next. So what can farmers do to improve the nutritional quality of their produce? So I presented the data actually in Kenya, and in a workshop, the farmers came up with lots of ideas. Next. So this was quite an enormous range of possibilities, and it really speaks to the point that I want to make, is that farmers themselves can alter their practices, bearing in mind soil microbiology, varieties you choose, the greenhouse gas effect.
Mary, Anne, can I ask you to wrap it up in 2 minutes?
Sorry, yes. Yes, so carbon dioxide is a bit more difficult to deal with, but at least we could stop pumping carbon dioxide into greenhouses, which would reduce the nutrient content. Oh, next. So next. So obviously we need some more research. We need to be monitoring the nutritional quality of foods more frequently and looking at much more detailed studies on nutritional quality and different agricultural practices, and some good cohort studies. Next. So some of the solutions, supporting farmers, obviously. There's also the whole issue of post-harvest. I mean, there's no point in increasing the nutritional value if it's then processed away. And for consumers, keep eating agroecologically produced fruit and vegetables if possible. And we're thinking about holistic solutions rather than single nutrient solutions. Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And may I request you to stay online for the questions later on? Okay. So, I mean, it's really interesting. It's getting more interesting with each additional speaker, because we are now moving from the location where you harvest to the type of the food compositions that you would have. And now we are talking about the historical changes in the nutrients that can happen, which can actually be affecting directly to the food security dilemma. So our last speaker is Vidisha Sharma. She's from the George Institute for Global Health India, and her title is Food Environment, Food Security and Dietary Quality of Rural Communities of Andhra Pradesh, India, and it's an exploratory type of study. On to you, Vidisha. Okay.
Thank you and a very good afternoon to all. So today I'm going to talk about an exploratory study where we are trying to see what is the current food security status and dietary diversity of the community and how the food environment is playing a role in these variables. So to give a background briefly, food systems shape the food environment and food environment along with food security impact the dietary diversity and quality of a community. Now, the shifts in food systems globally due to urbanization and globalization, it is also altering the diets. So a combination of all these factors together is actually impacting the nutritional status of a community. And in addition, in India, the rural communities, they are struggling with the rising double burden of malnutrition. Next slide, please. Therefore, the objective of this study was to assess the current food environment, food security status, and dietary quality among the rural communities in Andhra Pradesh, India. The association of food environment with food security and dietary diversity was also assessed. Next slide. So this cross-sectional study was conducted in Srikakulam district of Andhra Pradesh, where from 4 blocks, 8 clusters were selected purposively, and from these clusters, 16 villages were selected using random sampling technique. The final data was collected on 328 households, which were selected from these villages using systematic random sampling technique. The data were collected using a household survey questionnaire to know the socio-economic profile, food environment profiling questionnaire to understand the lived experiences of the respondents about their food environment. The food security status was assessed using the food insecurity experience scale developed by the FAO. And lastly, the dietary quality of the community was assessed using the dietary diversity scoring tool, which was developed based on the minimum dietary diversity indicator developed by the FAO. The data analysis was done using simple and multiple variable regression analysis. Next slide, please. So moving on to the results, on an average, the households accessed 3 food sources in jungle, and the commonly accessed food sources were farmland, local market, and government food programs. The food access diversity index was also calculated, which was observed to be low in the community, and it indicated poor diversity in context of food availability and access from natural sources like kitchen garden, farmland, and domesticated animals. Next slide. Overall, only 40% of the households were food secure, and nearly half of the households in the community experienced mild to moderate food insecurity. A smaller percentage also experienced severe food insecurity. Next slide. So the dietary diversity score of adult women of reproductive age in the households were observed to be 4, which was lower than the optimal score of 5. More than half of the respondents had a lower dietary diversity score, and in case of certain food groups like fruits, nuts, vitamin A rich fruits and vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables and eggs, in majority of the women the intake was very poor. Next slide. So the regression analysis revealed quite interesting associations and factors like engaging in a regular job, which is basically having a stable source of income, engaging in agriculture occupation, both these actually decreased the likelihood of food insecurity by up to 75%. Other than these factors, accessing food from farmland and having a better dietary diversity, they were also associated with a lower likelihood of food insecurity. Then, when we assess the determinants for better dietary diversity among adult women, households that had a separate kitchen, which is basically an indicator of better socioeconomic status, and women who were accessing food from kitchen garden and from forests and open fields, they had a better dietary diversity score. Next slide. To conclude, the key concerns that were observed are the community, they had a quite diverse food environment, But in spite of that, the dietary diversity was observed to be poor. The community, nearly half of them experienced mild to moderate food insecurity, and more than half of women, adult women in this community, they had a lower dietary diversity score. Now, to address these concerns, targeted interventions are needed, such as promotion of local farming with utilization of diverse regional crops. Along with this, integration of local food system into government food programs is also needed. This will not only strengthen the local food systems, but it will also help in diversifying the meals that are provided through the government food programs. They can be diversified by integrating, by incorporating indigenous food items that the community is producing. This information will also inform the policies that aim to enhance the food security and dietary diversity. So these suggested intervention can help in enhancing the food security and diet quality of the community. Next slide. These are some of the references used in this presentation, and I would like to thank everyone for your patient listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vidisha, and I would request you to stay online for the question answer session. I
Sure.
must appreciate all our speakers. They went within a time limit. So now we will be able to discuss some of the dynamics they talked about in the food value chain, which really affects, and some of the determinants which are often not identified along this chain, to see what happens in the food security dilemma. May I request all our speakers to come on the stage, please, all of you, and to be and our online speakers over there. Okay, the plan is we have time, about half an hour or so, if I'm okay, the ANH team. So we will take first 5 questions, and then if we have time, we will take the next round of questions. I would request you to direct the questions, if possible, to the speaker that you want to ask. And if the question can be as brief as possible, I would really appreciate that. So let's see the raise of hands. Okay, that, yeah, is the first one to raise the hand. Please introduce yourself so that.
Okay, I'm Pepijn Schreinemakers from World Vegetable Center, and I have a question for Anne-Marie. I loved your presentation. I had read your papers before. My question only to you is, are we talking about nutrient contents per dry matter or per fresh matter? Because crop breeding for higher yield might just increase the water content of vegetables. So I just want to clarify that with you. Thank you.
Okay, our next question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think, thank you for the presentation, very detailed. But I have a question which relates to the interactions of the variables which you looked at. Because I work with breeders. When they breed, there is always an objective of the breeding. So concluding that high-yielding varieties have low nutrients, I think is a very strong statement without looking at the breeding objectives that were in those papers. How do you account for that? And the second part is that all the variables you look like, climate, soil, variety, they interact on the farm. But you've looked at them individually and making very strong conclusions. How do you account for that? Thank you.
So this was also addressed to Anne. Okay. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Anjali, and my question is for Vidisha. Vidisha, you have looked for overall association with the diet diversity and food insecurity. Could you find out any specific food groups that were associated or they were lacking in this population? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
My question is to the speaker from Bangladesh. So overall, I'm just seeing that the costs of the food items have kind of decreased. That's what you're saying. Food inflation is a problem with many of our South Asian countries. So that is surprising? And number two, if people are eating so much food outside, like to what extent did it somehow compensate for the cereals that or the starchy staples that they are not consuming at home? And the increase in the consumption of vegetables is also almost threefold in the diet, it seems. So that's also a bit surprising in a decadal period. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take one more question. Maybe we should go on this side. Yes, at the sixth row, I think.
Thank you for the insightful presentations. My question is also for Anne-Marie. I actually have two questions. So question number one is, have you accounted for differences in nutrient content that may be not related to intrinsic differences in the crops themselves, but rather just methodological differences for analytical methods that were used in food composition tables with years passing by, improvements in equipment and analytical methods and sampling techniques? And then second question is, you talked about climate content, CO2 content dilution, nutrient content dilution, but that was in the context of rice. And I've read a lot of papers talking about staple crops with lower nutrient content due to CO2 increases. But I actually haven't read anything about fruits and vegetables. So I wanted to hear if you could, if you read something about that, or if you could comment on this point.
Okay, so let's answer to these 5 questions, and then we will have another round feasible, and we can ask other questions. Okay, on to you, Mary.
Me? Yes.
So you have probably 4 questions to answer.
Okay, so yeah, the first question about the dry weight or the wet weight basis, it was done on, we allowed for the dry weight, so it was adjusted to dry weight. And in fact, the water content had increased, so the fruit and vegetables had become a bit more watery. But in the analysis, we allowed for that by adjusting to dry weight. Then the question about the plant breeding, I think we weren't, I haven't been able to look at all the nuances of plant breeding. We've just looked at where we could find an analysis of side-by-side trials looking at the yield and nutrient content, and the high yielding ones tended to have lower nutrient content, which also, you're right, there's an interaction of effects. So to get high yields, you also add fertilizers, for example, and the fertilizers themselves could have an effect on the nutrient content. So, yeah, but in the trials we looked at, the method of agriculture was controlled, and it was just looking at a comparison of the genetic effect. Not easy to find studies actually to help you to answer this general question, and the carbon dioxide is one in particular, because you're right, the studies that I found tend to be on cereals because that's where most interest is, not on fruit and vegetables. But interestingly, they quite often look at the analysis in the foliar part of the cereals. But you're right. Who knows? We're grappling with the possible scenarios here, trying to understand what's been going on. But yes, and it's a huge problem that cereals are getting diluted by carbon dioxide. The other question about the experimental methods, in the first analysis that I did from the 1936 or 1940 data through to the 1990 data, I spent a lot of time and had a lot of correspondence with the Ministry of Agriculture in the UK. And they assured me that the methods had changed, but the accuracy was just as good as it was. And without being able to really thoroughly go into the old methods, I had to take that as read, really. So I think that's about it.
Yes, thank you. So we have another online question, but I would like to take the in-person question that was addressed to Sadat, and then we'll go back to Vidisha.
Sorry, thank you for the question. So yes, you're right. The price increase has been an issue for the last 5-6 years in South Asia. So as you can see, for this survey, for this research, we used quantitative data, panel survey data from 2012 to 2019. That was a fairly stable time. So that is why we could see that even though the nominal prices were increasing, but when we adjust it with GDP deflator for CPI, then the real prices were on the decrease. But also I added the price graph. You would see that from the line graphs that prices gone sharply after from the pandemic times, and also Bangladesh and India and other South Asian countries has been adversely affected due to the conflict in Russia-Ukraine. You are absolutely right. Second question, I also agree with you that yes, in my pie charts, I have shown that staples food budget share has decreased by 12 percentage points, and food away from home has been on the rise for 6 percentage points. And you can see my data is for rural households, but we can only imagine what is happening in the urban households in South Asian countries. So it is actually a massive concern. Maybe from a food safety perspective, nutritional security perspective, we need to be very careful about these issues. And also, you asked about the vegetable consumption. We, from IFPRI's side, we always try to cross-validate our findings. So we actually match these findings with national surveys. That is, there is this one big survey that goes on in Bangladesh. That is HIES, Household Income and Expenditure Survey, which is equivalent to the LSMS surveys in the World Bank funded LSMS surveys. So we also seen that between 2016 and 2022, vegetable consumption, fruits consumption, eggs and milk consumption has increased, just like I have shown in my slides. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you, Sadat. So we now move on to Vidisha. You had a question on the food groups.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, the food groups associations were not assessed because we only conducted the dietary diversity scoring tool and not the 24-hour dietary recall, which is a better representative of the total food group intake. So that is why those associations were not assessed.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Do we have more questions? Okay. Okay. We'll start with you first. And then two of you. And then if there's any, oh, okay, I'll make sure that you get.
Thank you to all the speakers. My question is for Lucia. I'm just wondering whether you have any bright ideas about how we could generate composition data at scale so we can support these subnational composition estimates and dietary estimates as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for this presentation. I have two questions, one for Lucia and one for Anne. Lucia, did you look at the seasonal variation in the nutrient content in the same crops in the same region? Because back in the days when I used to breed mice for living, I used to be a mouse breeder, feeding the mice on a grain composition, even coming from the same region, with seasonality, we had to remeasure the nutrient content in the same pellet we are giving to them as for every patch in order to ensure that there is no seasonal variations. And for the reduction in micronutrients that you found between 1949 to the recent dates, you looked at it, this reduction, did the overproduction or the increased productivity in fruit and vegetables counter this reduction in nutrients? In other words, fruits become more available by increasing productivity, which means more affordable potentially. They are some of the most expensive food groups, but that increase in productivity, does it counter or reduce the negative impact of nutrient content reduction? Thank you.
Thank you. One more question. Can we take this question first? And then I will go for the fourth one over here. Somebody had his raised hand. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, my question is for Talia. for Lucia. Has the calculation of nutrients eaten been adjusted for edible portions and nutrient loss during cooking?
Okay.
Was that my question?
Can we have a question from here on this side? Please give your name and...
Thank you very much. My name is Irene Kadere from FIBO. My question relates to the land reform presentation. So looking at the way communities manage land and also all the subdivisions that are going on, how do you see this unfolding in the next 20 years or in the next 30 years? And do you think there's going to be a very big shift in diets and also food security and nutritional intake? Thank you.
I'll take the last question from you, and then we'll start asking our
Thank you,
to answer.
Shahadat. I think you rightly point out regarding the progress of Bangladesh agriculture development, but I have a query to you, or we can say comment. If you see the freshwater fish production in the world, Bangladesh position is within the 5 to 3. But in your data, you mentioned freshwater fish consumption is decreasing. I think you are comparing with data in 2019. I think it may be COVID, it is a decrease. Otherwise, in case of fish price in Bangladesh, other food crop price is increasing, but fish price is stable. I think it is not. I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So maybe we can start, Lucia. Do you want to respond to the questions that was addressed to you?
Is it working? Yeah. Thank you for the question. So the first one on how can we generalize or improve. I would say first, of course, data collection should happen, maybe along with the household survey. So just collect some data from there. And then I think it's important to identify how, this highly spatial resolution is amazing, but maybe we can identify at what level really we need to collect instead of doing a massive survey. So for what food and for what micronutrient at what scale? I think that will be the question. But yeah, I think using household survey will be a good. And then the second one on the seasonality, we haven't looked at seasonality in the nutrient content in maize. I think in the geonutrition project they collect sample data on the main season when they were the crop when there was harvest season. I know that there is seasonality in food, and for maize in general, no much, so it's quite constant, but there is some seasonality on the type of flour, maize flour that is consumed in Malawi. But that will be account, I think, for the 3 different scenarios. And cooking, edible portion, yes, is adjust. For cooking, no, because at household level, they report food as purchased. So we didn't want to include, some bias on how to cook, so how you decide the cooking. So, for example, if you eat with the flour you transform in enzima, you might add more or less water. So it will be very difficult to really choose the cooking method. And that's why also that is because household level, so it's just apparent intake. So it's the best we can do. But thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And can we ask Lucy to talk about the land reform question that was addressed to you, Eunice?
Thank you so much for the question. I think with the passing of lands or with the fragmentation of agricultural lands, as we saw, is something that should get all of us worried. And these findings will not be seen in national land cadastral because when a reform is in process, people are registering the lands. But the fragmentation will not be seen in the sense that when people are registering lands, they consider cost. So in these communities, if one family decides to register a land, they are all going to measure their lands together. So in reality, from the national framework, you will think, let's say, 100 people have registered their lands. And out of these 100 people, on average, you say they have 30 hectares of land. But that is not the reality, as I showed in the presentation. So this is something that should keep us being worried, because in reality, the lands are fragmented. And when lands are fragmented, it limits so many things. For instance, when it comes to crops that people have to produce, we shouldn't forget that these lands have been used over and over, so they have reduced their fertility. So now, how are they going to plant? So in my project, we also have food scientists who are measuring all these components of diet, nutrition. But from my interactions with the community, food consumption patterns have changed. Among Fulani's, tubers such as yams was a common food that they could eat entirely. But now these have changed because the lands are no more to support their food system that they were used to. So I think this is something that we should be more worried about. And a reform at the national level, or if we are just taking figures that we are receiving, doesn't show us the reality on the field. Lands have been fragmented. People have less lands. And this is also a social innovation with land registration. And like every other innovation, people are being excluded. So if people are enclosing their land, because tenure security means land is enclosed for other people. So what it means that people who do not have or own land now no more have access to plant food. Thank you.
Thank you. Now may I ask Sadat to answer the questions which was addressed by?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sarkar, for this intriguing question. You are correct, and I have also shown in my slide that the freshwater captured fish price has been on the decrease in Bangladesh. And it is also a bit puzzling for us why the fish consumption in food intake was a bit lower between 2012 and 2019. And if we look deeply into it, we see that there has been a decrease in the small fish consumption. The large fish consumption has been okay. But it is also a concerning fact, because small fish like mollard, hella, these are actually very important for vitamin A and other nutrients. And esteemed researchers like Dr. Shakuntala Thilstead has done remarkable research in this arena. So I think this is something also the policymakers can take a look into and try to address these issues. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Sadat. There was one question addressed to Anne. Anne, do you recall that?
Yes. So it was a question about productivity and whether perhaps increasing productivity would compensate in some way for the diminishing nutrient content of the food. And I would say, you know, if what you're looking at is how many nutrients you can get out of a hectare of land and the yield is increased, you might say you're getting roughly the same nutrients as you did. But for human nutrition, you know, we can't eat more food and more calories without getting overweight. So if the food isn't as nutrient dense as it was, then you have to eat more to compensate for it. And some people are saying that these nutrient challenges might be one of the causes of overweight and obesity even. So I think for a farmer, they might say, yes, I'm growing more and with this high yielding varieties. But from the consumer's point of view, it's not very helpful because you have to eat according to the carbohydrates. And particularly for the cereals, this is very important. Not sure whether that was what you were asking exactly.
Thank you, Anne. Luckily, most of all our speakers did a very good time management. So we still can take a couple of more questions. If I missed anybody who raised their hand, please, okay. Yes.
Great. My name is Andrea Bulungu. Thanks to all the speakers today. This question is a methodological question for Eunice. So I'm very curious in the community mapping of land tenure as a method, and I'm just curious, is it a very sensitive process? So I'm based in Uganda. I do a lot of work in Uganda, and there, you know, if you try to find out who owns this particular piece of land, that can be quite contentious, actually, even within families. So I'm just curious if you can expand a little bit more on that method. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just take another question, and then I will ask you to answer it. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Martin Tabe from the World Bank. So my question is as well to Eunice. Really interesting work, super relevant. I just want you to pay some thoughts on some things I was thinking about when you were presenting. You know, when we think about linking land tenure and food security, you know, we're always looking at three mechanisms, right? You know, this assurance effect that people can, you know, use their lands to grow really tree crops that stays over time. But we're also thinking about collateralization and then the realizability. And then you paid a lot of interest on the fact that, you know, we should be scared about fragmentation. But how active are the land markets? Do people sell their land? Because if people sell their land a lot, you know, it could have negative implications on food and dietary security. But also in terms of collateralization, it could rather have a positive impact if people can use their land, you know, to get access to credits, you know, to get access to services that they can use to rather cultivate more crops and then increase the food security. I didn't hear any of this in your discussion, but I wanted to know whether this is happening in northern Benin. Thank you.
I'll take one more question from this side of the audience because, yes, at the end.
Thanks. I have a question for Lucia based on Malawi. In the northern part, was it considered based on seasonality? I know you answered the seasonality question, but also their consumption patterns are so different. You know, they eat a lot more cassava and rice up north, so I was just wondering if that affected any of the results or not. And then for the lady on the land tenor, some of your pictures on the diversity that was being promoted with the smaller fragmented pieces of land. Just how willing were farmers to take that on? And if you were to transform it into, say, more agroecological based design, would there be openness to that? And then the connection to, you know, there's a lot of conversation around the carbon taxes and carbon projects coming into spaces like this and monetizing spaces for farms. And I wonder just what the attitude is based on that, layered onto fragmented pieces of land, because that is such a contentious issue with land tenure as well around carbon projects when they're doing land ownership signings. I just wonder how that works or if that's in that space yet. Thank you.
Okay, so I think let's start with Eunice because I think she has a couple of questions to answer to the. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about the methods that we employ to do the land tenure mapping. So as you all know, with ethnography, you need trust of the community. So this fieldwork actually started in 2022, and we are still uncovering. So what happens is that you need to live in the community, build trust, because what they tell you over time kind of changes. We have done the families will map the land for you, tell you they own the land, but in further interrogations or in further conversations, you get to know that the lands that they claim to own are contentious. Let me give an example. In my context, we are looking at Fulani communities. And as I mentioned to you, they have history of nomadic and semi-nomadic. So most of these lands that some of them claim ownership are also in contention with autochthonous groups such as Bariba, in northern Benin, Bariba. So people who claim that these lands are for them. So this rather made us see the limitations with a formal land tenure systems. Because even in the customary systems where there are negotiations, there are people who can talk over, there are still this land conflict. How much more when land tenure gets a legal backing? So as we speak now, there are so many narratives of displacement because people are, I link it to the second question. Land has now become a commodity. So land has or been detached from its social relation, from its ecological relation. Because once you parcel a piece of land, once it becomes like a resource, people think that, oh, they can sell the land. So we have families that when they don't have enough resources like income, they tend to sell the land. But in my case study community, what they have done is that there are no land markets. So the community put in place that we don't sell land here. So that has to do with the second part. And there are so many land markets in the rise in northern Benin, and I'm sure it's so much part of other African contexts. And then it's, 1 second. So I think I missed the B part. There was a B part of the land market and access to credit. Awesome. So when it comes to rural context, our logic of driving home this idea that when land is being parceled, when land gets a legal value, people or rural communities will be able to get access to market doesn't work in all contexts. In northern Benin, in Chauru Commune, for instance, local communities cannot use this land document because most of them don't even have the money to continue throughout all the process to formalize their land, to have the legal document. And we shouldn't forget that the final legal document in my case is a land title. The cost of a land title is very expensive. A rural community or a let me say an average person cannot afford. It's the rich people, the elites. So it's rather, so that's why I said it's not linear. It's rather driving home land markets among the elites. So rural communities are not using, so the access to credit is not for rural people. So it's rather incentivizing other people to purchase more lands from the rural community. So I must say land credit doesn't work in our case. And the last part, I think I was struggling a bit to follow, but yes, I think that was the last question about whether carbon project, if you can repeat that because I was struggling a bit. I was still having my head around the first two questions. So if you can, yeah.
Sure. I mean, if that's a risk right now in the space that you're working in terms of carbon land rights, and if there are carbon projects coming in based on that.
No, there are not. Okay. But what is more happening now is conservation of lands. So now there are more conservation projects which are being sponsored by NGOs and by the government. Because it's an agro-pastoral area, there is intense competition on the land. So what now the government is trying to do and other stakeholders is rather to conserve the land. So they will leave a big part of the land for forest. Okay. We are not supposed to cut trees. So this sense of carbon projects are not yet in my case study.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Lucia, you had the question. Do you want to respond to it? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So yeah, in the north, it's true that they have like more food diversity. They've like cassava is reported in the household survey, so it will be included. We don't have like spatial resolute data for cassava, which will be very interesting. But normally, the selenium available for plant in the north area is low. So my hypothesis is that the result will be very similar. But okay. Yeah.
Okay. Did we have a question for Anne? And did you note a question, or I think that's it? Oh, okay. 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 Thank you for those excellent questions, and to our speakers for their thoughtful responses. Give them a big clap of. I would like to now thank all our speakers once again for their thought-provoking presentation and the rich evidence that they have shared with us, especially from the land transition and spatial nutrient mapping to the evolving food environments that they talked about, shaping the dietary quality and dietary diversity. These diverse perspectives highlight how the interconnected and context-specific the determinants of food insecurity, food security, and nutrition truly are. So you can't have only single lens. It has to be a multiple lens that needs to be used on that. I hope today's sessions inspires further dialogue and collaboration across disciplines. Thank you for all your attention and engagement with our speakers. We now move on to, I will hand it over to the ANH team. They're better in housekeeping announcement. Thank you.